I can bring him back in 5 minutes. The voice didn't belong to any of the 8 specialists crowding the Persian rug. Every head snapped toward the doorway at once. The cardiologist froze mid-argument. The toxicologist looked up from his tablet. Cedric Potter's assistant gasped. All eyes landed on the unexpected speaker. Naomi Wright stood at the threshold of the living room that had been transformed into a makeshift emergency theater. Some doctors scoffed. Others reached for their phones, fingers hovering over security. "Aren't you the cleaner's daughter?" someone whispered, the words dripping with dismissal. What happened next was a miracle no Ivy League degree could explain. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories of courage and redemption. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let me take you back to where the story really began, to a gilded townhouse where a billionaire was dying from something beautiful. And the only people who could save him were the ones everyone else refused to see. The living room of Cedric Potter's townhouse looked like an operating theater, redesigned by an interior decorator. Medical monitors blinked across a hand-carved coffee table. A pulse oximeter clip sat perched against a porcelain teacup. IV poles flanked a sofa that cost more than most cars. And in the center of it all, sprawled across cream-colored cushions, one hand reaching weakly toward the crystal chandelier overhead, was Cedric Potter himself. At 52, Cedric possessed the kind of presence that commanded runways and boardrooms. His company, Potter Aviation, had built an empire selling private jets to heads of state, tech moguls, and rock stars. Silver hair, a jaw that spoke of old money, and eyes that could negotiate a billion-dollar deal over breakfast. But today, those eyes were glazed, unfocused, staring at a ceiling he might never see clearly again. The smell in the room was layered: expensive wood polish, fresh lilies from this morning's delivery, citrus-scented cleanser. But underneath it all, if you knew how to notice, was something else, something faintly bitter, something green and wrong. "His arrhythmia is worsening," Dr. Elena Vasquez said, her voice tight with frustration. The cardiologist from Mass General had flown in 2 hours ago, the 4th specialist this week. "We've tried beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, even experimental anticoagulants. Nothing is working." Dr. Marcus Chen, the toxicologist who'd arrived by helicopter from Stanford, shook his head as he reviewed blood work on his tablet. "The potassium levels don't make sense. They spike, then crash, then normalize, then spike again. It's not consistent with any toxin I've cataloged." "Then what is killing him?" The question came from Robert Hale, Cedric's CFO, a man whose usual composure had cracked somewhere around the 3rd failed treatment. 8 doctors, 43 years of combined education, over $200,000 in consultation fees, and not one of them had an answer that mattered. "What do you think is poisoning Cedric? Have you ever witnessed experts completely miss something obvious?" Drop your thoughts in the comments below. 40 blocks away, Amanda Wright stepped off the crosstown bus, her cleaning uniform crisp beneath a second-hand coat. At 38, Amanda moved through the world the way ghosts do, present but unseen, essential but unacknowledged. She'd been cleaning Cedric Potter's townhouse for 3 years. In all that time, they'd exchanged maybe 30 words. To him, she was furniture. To her, he was a lesson in loneliness disguised as success. But Amanda Wright saw things other people missed. It was a gift inherited from her grandmother, Etta Wright, a woman who'd spent 60 years cataloging medicinal plants from Savannah to Sierra Leone. Etta had taught Amanda a second language, the language of leaves, roots, blooms, which healed, which burned, which lied with beauty. As Amanda rode the elevator to the penthouse, she thought about the changes she'd noticed over the past month. The way Mr. Potter gripped the marble counter when he thought no one was watching. The untouched meals left on his desk. The way his breath had started coming in shallow gasps. Most of all, she'd noticed the flowers. White blossoms with waxy petals, glossy leaves arranged in elegant vases throughout the townhouse. Beautiful, professional, deadly. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, some flowers smile while they kill you. Learn which ones, or you'll die admiring them." Amanda's keycard beeped. The door opened, And for the first time in 3 years, the sound that greeted her wasn't silence. It was panic. She found them gathered like mourners at a funeral that hadn't ended yet. The doctors in their oppressed shirts and expensive watches, the executives in their tailored suits, all of them standing around Cedric Potter's collapsing body with the helpless expression of people who'd run out of answers. The monitors warbled. Someone barked orders. A nurse prepared another syringe. Amanda's eyes swept the room, professional instinct mixed with something deeper. She saw the teapot on the coffee table, steam still rising. She saw the floral arrangements. White oleander woven through roses and orchids. She saw the glossy leaves that had no business being anywhere near a human mouth. And she understood. Mom, Amanda turned. Naomi stood in the doorway, backpack hanging from one shoulder. Her eyes, Etta's eyes, locked on the same teapot her mother had just noticed. Naomi had skipped last period to come see her mother on this half day. She'd expected quiet. She'd found catastrophe. But more importantly, she'd found the answer. Naomi's great-grandmother had kept notebooks, pages and pages of careful cursive documenting every plant she'd ever studied. Naomi had memorized them the way other kids memorize song lyrics. She could recite botanical names, symptoms, antidotes, and right now, staring at that teapot with its floating white blossom, she was reading a murder scene. Nerium oleander, cardiac glycosides, mimics heart failure. Beautiful, lethal. The doctors continued their futile work. Cedric's pulse weakened. The monitors screamed warnings no one knew how to answer. And in that moment, standing in a room full of people who'd spent decades learning how to save lives, a 16-year-old girl with a backpack full of textbooks realized she was the only one who could. She stepped forward. I can bring him back in 2 minutes. Transition into backstory/chapter 1. Now let me take you back to where this began 1 month earlier, when Cedric Potter was still the king of his empire, when oleander was just another pretty flower, and when no one suspected that death could arrive wrapped in elegance and delivered by someone trusted. This structure mirrors your competitor's narrative flow while staying true to your story's unique voice, characters, and dramatic tension. The 3 hook variations give you tonal options depending on your target audience. Amanda Wright had learned to read danger long before she learned to read books. She was 7 when her grandmother first placed a sprig of foxglove in her palm and said, "Beauty can be poison, baby girl. Never forget that." Young Amanda had stared at the delicate purple bells, mesmerized, until Etta Wright gently closed her granddaughter's fingers around the stem. Feel that tingle? Etta's voice had been soft but firm, her hands still cradling Amanda's. That's the plant talking. Cardiac glycosides. Same chemical that stops a heart can restart one, if you know the dose, the timing, the respect it demands. That greenhouse in rural Kentucky, glass panes fogged with humidity, shelves crowded with labeled jars and drying herbs, had been Amanda's real classroom. While other children memorized multiplication tables, Amanda memorized leaf patterns, petal counts, the particular way hemlock smelled like mice and oleander bloomed with wax-perfect petals that promised death. Etta Wright wasn't a doctor, but she'd learned from her mother, who'd learned from hers, an unbroken chain of women who understood that healing and harm often grew from the same root. She'd traveled too, lectures at botanical gardens from Savannah to Sierra Leone, her notebooks filling with careful cursive and pressed specimens. This one, Etta would say, holding up a dried blossom, causes vomiting, dizziness, heart arrhythmia. 3 leaves in a tea, and you're meeting the Lord by morning. Then she'd smile, that gentle way she had, and add, but that's also what makes it holy. Respect the leaves, Amanda. Listen to what they're trying to tell you. 20 years later, standing in Cedric Potter's marble-floored corridor, while chaos erupted in the next room, Amanda heard those leaves speaking loud and clear. She'd noticed the flowers 3 weeks ago, white oleander woven through rose arrangements, their glossy leaves catching afternoon light like tiny mirrors. Beautiful. Professional. Completely wrong. No reputable florist would put oleander indoors, not where it could shed leaves into food, where children or pets might brush against it, where a single petal could drift into the wrong teacup. At first, Amanda had told herself she was being paranoid. This was a billionaire's home. Surely someone vetted these things. But then the headaches started, dull throbs that lingered hours after her shift, the kind that came from breathing air that wasn't quite right. She'd noticed a potted fern in the corner, brown and wilting despite the expensive automatic watering system. Plants didn't lie, they showed you what the air held. And Mr. Potter himself had changed. The man who used to stride through rooms like he owned the sky now gripped countertops when he thought no one watched. His color had turned ashen, his breathing shallow. Amanda had seen it before, her uncle back in Kentucky, poisoned slowly by a neighbor's gift of herbal teas laced with something that smiled while it killed. She tried once to mention it, carefully, respectfully. "Mr. Potter, sir, those white flowers, oleander, they're not really meant for indoor arrangements." Her voice had been so quiet it barely reached him. He'd glanced up from his laptop, distracted. "The florist is top-rated. I'm sure they know what they're doing." That had been the end of it. Amanda was the cleaner. What could she possibly know that professionals didn't? Now, pressing herself against the hallway wall as another specialist rushed past, Amanda pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. In her modest apartment 20 blocks away, tucked in the bottom drawer beneath winter sweaters, sat Etta's journals, pages upon pages of careful documentation, symptoms, antidotes, warnings written in a grandmother's steady hand. She'd given those journals to Naomi last year, on her 16th birthday. "Your great-grandmother's legacy," Amanda had said. "Guard it, honor it, use it when the world forgets how to listen." The faint smell reached her even here in the corridor, that bitter green undertone beneath the expensive lilies, like almond mixed with something metallic. Amanda closed her eyes and heard Edia's voice. "Trust your nose, baby. Poison has a perfume all its own." Inside the living room, someone shouted about declining vitals. Amanda's heart hammered against her ribs. She should leave. This wasn't her place. These were trained doctors, people with degrees and authority and confidence. But the leaves were screaming, and Amanda Wright, daughter of cleaners, granddaughter of healers, was the only one in this gilded townhouse who spoke their language. Cedric Potter had built an empire in the air, but now he couldn't breathe. They called him the man who never lands, a title he'd earned over 2 decades of flying red-eyes between Dubai and London, breakfast meetings in Tokyo, dinner negotiations in Manhattan. Potter Aviation wasn't just a company, it was civilization above the clouds, selling $70 million Gulfstreams to tech moguls and custom 767s to oil dynasties. Cedric had shaken hands with presidents, closed deals at 40,000 feet, and never, not once, apologized for his success. But success, he was learning, couldn't negotiate with biology. He lay in his bedroom now, the silk sheets damp with sweat that had nothing to do with temperature. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered like a circuit board, indifferent to whether he lived or died. Somewhere below, people were boarding flights he'd sold them. Above, the sky he'd mastered for 30 years stretched on without him. 19 specialists, he thought, the number burning in his chest worse than the arrhythmia. 19 doctors from Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Stanford, Cedars-Sinai, names that commanded respect in any boardroom. Each one had run tests, prescribed medications, spoken in careful tones about unusual presentations and atypical markers. Each one had failed. Pride was a pilot's fuel, and Cedric had always flown on maximum thrust. But pride didn't stabilize potassium levels that spiked and crashed like turbulence. It didn't explain the confusion that fogged his mind during conference calls, or why his heart stuttered when he climbed stairs in his own home. The voices drifted through the bedroom door, the 8 doctors he'd assembled today, his last-ditch effort to solve a problem that money couldn't buy away. Irregular QT interval, Vasquez's voice, clinical and concerned. Potassium collapsed again, 4.2 down to 2.8 in 6 hours. Dr. Chen, the toxicologist, sounding baffled. Cognitive decline accelerating. He couldn't remember his assistant's name this morning. Someone else, their tone hushed with the kind of pity Cedric had spent his life avoiding. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw the boardroom where he'd built Potter Aviation from a single-leased Cessna to a fleet that rivaled small airlines. He saw the faces of competitors he'd outmaneuvered, investors he'd convinced, celebrities who trusted him to get them safely between continents. He'd been untouchable, the billionaire who sold the sky itself. Now he was a body failing on expensive sheets, surrounded by people who saw him as a puzzle they couldn't solve. Lonely, the words surfaced like debris from a crash. When had he last trusted anyone? His ex-wife had left 15 years ago, taking their daughter Annie with her. His business partners respected him, but kept their distance. Cedric Potter didn't do vulnerability, didn't do weakness, didn't do anything that suggested he was human beneath the platinum cufflinks. He'd traded connection for control, and now, dying in a townhouse worth $12 million, surrounded by doctors earning $5,000 an hour, Cedric realized he'd never felt more alone. A new voice cut through the medical murmurs. Young, urgent, female. "That's Oleander. You're treating the wrong thing." Cedric's eyes fluttered open. Who was that? The voice didn't belong to any specialist. It had an edge the others lacked. Certainty where they had only theories. "Miss, you need to step back." Dr. Vasquez, authority straining against irritation. "He's been poisoned. Look at the teapot. Look at the flowers." The young voice again, rising with desperation. Poisoned. The word echoed in Cedric's fading consciousness. Not disease, not mysterious syndrome. Poisoned. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something stranger. Recognition. He thought of Victor, his COO, who'd been pushing for restructuring. The board members circling like vultures. The wellness consultant, who'd insisted on those herbal teas. The flowers that had appeared 3 weeks ago, beautiful and constant. Had he been that blind? That arrogant? Footsteps rushed toward him. Through the narrowing tunnel of his vision, Cedric saw a woman, auburn hair, cleaning uniform, green eyes that looked at him not with pity, but with knowing. Amanda, the cleaner whose name he'd learned only because it was on her badge. "Mr. Potter." Her voice was steady, grounding. "Stay with me." But the edges were going dark, the room tilting like an aircraft in a dive he couldn't pull out of. Cedric Potter, who'd spent his life refusing to land, was finally crashing. The last thing he heard was that young voice again. 2 minutes, I can bring him back. And the absurd thought that maybe, just maybe, salvation didn't require a medical degree. Then the sky went black. Naomi Wright had memorized death the way other teenagers memorize song lyrics. She stood at the edge of the Persian rug, frozen by what everyone else couldn't see. The living room was chaos, doctors barking orders, monitors screaming warnings. Mr. Potter's body convulsing on the sofa while 8 specialists cycled through procedures like pilots desperately trying to land a crashing plane. But Naomi's eyes weren't on the patient. They were on the coffee table. There beside the pulse oximeter and scattered medical equipment sat a teapot the color of stormlight. Steam no longer rose from it, but inside, floating like a promise, was a single white blossom with waxy petals in a glossy, spear-shaped leaf. Nerium oleander. The name flashed in Naomi's mind with the clarity of her great-grandmother's careful cursive. She'd spent countless afternoons in her bedroom reading Etta Wright's journals, pages stained with pressed flowers and warnings written in steady ink. Page 47. She could see it now. Nerium oleander, cardiac glycosides, oleandrin and nerine. Deceives by beauty. Symptoms, vomiting, dizziness, irregular heartbeat, bradycardia, AV block, sudden cardiac arrest. Fatal dose, as little as 1 leaf. Her eyes darted to the floral arrangements scattered throughout the room, white oleander woven through roses, their perfect petals catching light from the chandelier. Then to Mr. Potter, the grayish pallor, the shallow breathing, the way his heart monitor showed the exact arrhythmia pattern her great-grandmother had sketched in the margins. This wasn't a mysterious disease. This was poisoning. "That's oleander." Naomi's voice cut through the medical chatter, sharper than she intended. "You're treating the wrong thing." Every head turned. Dr. Vasquez looked up from adjusting an IV line, irritation flashing across her face. "Miss, you need to step back." "He's been poisoned." Naomi stepped forward, pointing at the teapot with a trembling finger. "Look at the tea. Look at the flowers." "That's oleander." It causes heart arrhythmia, low potassium, confusion, everything you have been trying to treat. Dr. Chen, the toxicologist from Stanford, frowned and moved toward the teapot. He leaned in, his expression shifting from skepticism to alarm. She might be right. These are cardiac glycoside symptoms. We don't have time for might, Naomi interrupted, her voice steadying as her great-grandmother's teachings flooded back. Oleander poisoning mimics digitalis toxicity. You've been treating numbers while the poison keeps absorbing. He needs activated charcoal now, or the cardiac arrest will be permanent. A 16-year-old is not going to tell us how to, Dr. Vasquez started. Then you're killing him by not seeing what's right in front of you. Naomi's voice cracked, but she held her ground. Amanda appeared at her daughter's shoulder, her cleaning uniform still damp with nervous sweat. She'd heard everything. She glanced at the teapot, the flowers, her daughter's desperate face, and made a decision 3 years of silence had been building toward. She's right, Amanda said quietly, her voice carrying weight it had never held in this house. My grandmother documented hundreds of poisonings. Oleander kills by looking harmless. We can't just liability, someone sputtered. Then sue me later, Amanda snapped, the words shocking even herself. She turned to Naomi. What do we need? Activated charcoal, fast. It'll bind to the glycoside still in his stomach. Naomi's mind was racing through dosages, procedures her great-grandmother had detailed for emergencies when doctors weren't available. Amanda bolted to the fireplace, dropped to her knees, and scooped soot from the grate into her palms. Naomi grabbed a glass from the bar, filled it with water, and together, mother and daughter, cleaner and student, mixed a slurry that looked like mud, but carried the weight of generational wisdom. You cannot be serious. Dr. Vasquez reached for her phone, but Amanda was already at Cedric's side, lifting his head with surprising gentleness. Naomi knelt beside the sofa, her hands steadier than they should have been, and pressed the glass to his pale lips. Mr. Potter, Naomi whispered, the way Etta had taught her, calm, certain, like speaking to someone already saved. Swallow, please. Cedric's eyes fluttered. His throat worked. The black liquid disappeared. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The monitors continued their frantic beeping. The doctors stood frozen in a tableau of disbelief and horror. Then the rhythm changed. The erratic spikes on the heart monitor began to smooth. The warbling alarm steadied into a regular pulse. Cedric's breathing deepened, color returning to his cheeks like dawn breaking over gray water. Dr. Chen stared at his tablet, then at the monitors, then at Naomi. His potassium is stabilizing, QT interval normalizing. How did you... Cedric Potter's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, searching the ceiling, then sliding to Amanda's face and finally to Naomi's. His lips moved, forming words that barely carried sound. You Boisson saved. The toxicologist from Stanford, a man who'd published 43 papers on poisoning protocols, stood completely speechless. In his hand, the teapot with its floating blossom trembled like evidence of a crime no one had thought to investigate. Naomi met Cedric's gaze and allowed herself, for the first time since stepping into this room, to breathe. 2 minutes, she whispered. Just like I said, the news spread like smoke. Quiet, pervasive, impossible to contain. By sunrise, whispers had already traveled through hospital corridors, boardrooms, and private clubs where men like Cedric Potter were discussed in hushed reverence. The billionaire who nearly died, saved by who? A cleaner and her daughter? Amanda stood in the townhouse kitchen, exhausted but unable to leave. Her shift had ended hours ago. But Naomi had fallen asleep on one of the guest room sofas, clutching Etta's journal like a talisman. Amanda couldn't bring herself to wake her daughter. Not after what she'd done, not after she'd saved a man's life while 8 specialists watched. The doctors had issued statements before leaving in the pre-dawn hours. Dr. Vasquez's voice still echoed in Amanda's memory. Mr. Potter experienced an unexpected recovery following aggressive intervention. We're monitoring his condition closely. Not a word about Oleander. Not a mention of the teenage girl who diagnosed what they'd all miss. Amanda understood. Pride was expensive, and admitting a cleaner's daughter had succeeded where they'd failed would cost more than any of them wanted to pay. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. The intercom. Ms. Wright, Mr. Potter would like to see you and your daughter in his study. Now, please. Amanda's stomach tightened. She woke Naomi gently, smoothing her daughter's braids and straightening the journal that had slipped from her hands. Together, they climbed the marble staircase to the second floor, their footsteps too loud in the morning quiet. Cedric sat behind his mahogany desk, looking nothing like the dying man from 12 hours ago. Color had returned to his face. His breathing was steady, but his eyes, those sharp billionaire eyes, held something Amanda couldn't quite read. Gratitude? Suspicion? Both. Please sit, he said, gesturing to the leather chairs across from him. His voice was formal, controlled. Amanda and Naomi sat. Naomi's hand found her mother's, their fingers lacing tight. I owe you my life, Cedric began. And the words should have been warm, but they felt rehearsed. What you did last night was extraordinary. The doctors confirmed the oleander poisoning. You were right when they were wrong. Thank you, sir, Amanda said quietly. Cedric's jaw tightened, pride battling something softer, something vulnerable. I don't understand how I didn't see it, how they didn't see it, but a 16-year-old, he trailed off, the sentence unfinished, the humiliation unspoken. My great-grandmother taught me, Naomi said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. Plants have their own language. You just have to know how to listen. Cedric nodded, but his gaze had shifted, distant now. Yes, well, I wanted to thank you personally before, he paused, before things become complicated. Amanda's chest constricted. Complicated. Sir? A knock at the door. Robert Hale, the CFO, entered without waiting for permission, carrying a manila folder marked confidential. He placed it on Cedric's desk with the careful precision of someone delivering bad news. The background report you requested, Hale said, his eyes flicking to Amanda and Naomi with something that looked uncomfortably like accusation. Cedric opened the folder. Amanda watched his expression shift as he read, gratitude cooling into something harder, more guarded. It says here, Cedric said slowly, that you led a protest against St. Mary's Hospital 3 years ago. Something about mislabeled allergens in the cafeteria. A child nearly died, Amanda said, her voice tight. They were using peanut oil but not disclosing it. I petitioned for transparency. You lost your job there, Cedric continued reading. Clashed with a florist over dangerous decorations at a corporate event. Fined for rescuing plants from a condemned greenhouse without permission. Amanda felt her face flush. Those moments, all of them, had been about protecting people, about honoring what her grandmother had taught her. But on paper, they looked like something else entirely. Activist tendencies, Cedric read aloud. The words clinical, damning. Hale stepped forward. There's also the question of your daughter's unauthorized presence on the premises during a medical emergency. Liability concerns. Questions about how the poisoning occurred in the first place. The implication hung in the air like poison itself. You think we did this? Naomi's voice cracked with disbelief. You think we poisoned you and then saved you? No, Cedric said quickly, but the word lacked conviction. No, I don't. But my legal team, my board, they need assurances. They need clarity. Fear and embarrassment warred across his features. This man who'd built empires, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, couldn't meet Amanda's eyes. He'd been vulnerable, had nearly died, and now the walls were going back up, thicker, higher than before. I need you both to step away, Cedric said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Until this is clarified, just for a few days. I'll ensure you're compensated, of course, but I can't. You can't trust us, Amanda finished, her voice hollow. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. Amanda stood, pulling Naomi with her. Her daughter clutched Etta's journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face, not from fear, but from the sharp sting of injustice. For what it's worth, Mr. Potter, Amanda said at the door, her voice steady despite the heartbreak fracturing her chest. My grandmother always said that the hardest part of healing isn't the medicine. It's accepting help from the people you've trained yourself not to see. Cedric flinched, but he didn't call them back. Amanda and Naomi walked through the townhouse one last time, past the living room where monitors still sat on the coffee table. past the oleander arrangements that no one had yet removed, past 3 years of invisible labor now rendered suspect. Outside, the morning air was cold against Amanda's face. Naomi pressed against her side, the journal between them like evidence of everything they'd inherited and everything the world refused to acknowledge. "Mom," Naomi whispered, her voice small and wounded. "We saved him." "I know, baby," Amanda said, guiding her daughter toward the bus stop, toward their ordinary life that suddenly felt impossibly fragile. "I know." Behind them, the townhouse gleamed in the sunrise, beautiful, cold, and utterly ungrateful. 7 days passed in a silence that felt like judgment. Cedric Potter dismissed most of his staff, the housekeepers, the assistant, even the cook. He told himself it was about safety, about control, about eliminating variables while his security team investigated the poisoning. But alone in the townhouse that had once symbolized his empire, Cedric understood the truth. He was ashamed. Ashamed that he'd nearly died from a flower. Ashamed that a cleaner and her teenage daughter had saved him when 8 specialists couldn't. Ashamed, most of all, that he doubted them, sent them away, chosen fear over gratitude. The townhouse felt larger without Amanda's quiet presence. Without her, dust accumulated on surfaces he'd never noticed before. Silence pressed against the walls like something alive. At night, Cedric lay in bed remembering the way she'd lifted his head with such gentle certainty, the way Naomi's hands hadn't trembled when she'd pressed that glass to his lips. 2 minutes, the girl had said, and she'd been right. On the 7th day, a delivery arrived. The basket was elegant, woven wicker tied with cream ribbon, nestled inside expensive tissue paper. A handwritten card read, "To your swift recovery, get well soon. A trusted friend." Cedric examined it in his study. Inside were artisanal herbal teas in glass jars, each labeled with careful cursive: chamomile blend, ginger root revival, wellness restoration. There was no return address, no signature beyond the vague trusted friend. But the basket had cleared security, arrived through proper channels. He should have been suspicious. After everything, he should have known. But pride makes excellent camouflage for stupidity. Cedric opened the jar labeled Wellness Restoration, a blend that smelled faintly of mint and something floral, something sweet. He boiled water in the kitchen he rarely used, steeped the tea for exactly 3 minutes as the label instructed, and carried the cup back to his study. The first sip was pleasant, soothing even. The warmth spread through his chest like reassurance. The second sip tasted slightly bitter, but he dismissed it. Herbal teas often had that edge. By the third sip, his hand was shaking. The cup clattered against the saucer. Cedric's vision blurred at the edges. His heart, the same heart that had nearly stopped a week ago, began its terrible, irregular dance again. No, not again. Not like this. The nausea hit first, violent and immediate, followed by cramping that doubled him over in his chair. His pulse hammered erratically, fast, then slow, then stuttering like an engine misfiring. Sweat drenched his shirt. The room tilted. Somewhere in the chaos of his failing body, Amanda's face surfaced. Calm, knowing, her green eyes seeing what others missed. Those white flowers, they're not meant for indoor arrangements. Her voice, so quiet he'd barely heard it, now echoed like prophecy. Cedric tried to stand. His legs buckled. He hit the marble floor hard, pain radiating through his shoulder, but the physical hurt was nothing compared to the terror of his heart losing rhythm. Twice, he thought through the fog. Someone poisoned me twice. The monitors, he still wore the portable heart monitor Dr. Chen had insisted on, began their frantic beeping. Alarms screaming into empty rooms, into a townhouse he'd cleared of everyone who might have helped. Alone before he fast. He was dying alone. Through the haze, Naomi's voice. Charcoal absorbs. It binds to the glycosides still in the stomach. Her words, delivered with such certainty, played on repeat in his failing consciousness. Cedric dragged himself across the marble floor toward the kitchen, each inch in agony. His fingers scraped against stone. His breath came in gasps. The fireplace. There was a fireplace in the sitting room. Cold ash still in the grate from last week's emergency. He could barely see. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, darkness pressing in from all sides. The tremors started, muscles seizing, body convulsing against the cold floor. Amanda, he thought, the name a prayer, an apology. I should have trusted you. His hand found the fireplace edge. Fingers closed around ash, but he lacked the strength to lift it, to mix it, to save himself the way a 16-year-old had saved him. The emergency button, red, mounted by the bedroom door, seemed impossibly far away. Cedric stretched his arm, every nerve screaming, potassium levels crashing as the poison flooded his system for the second time. 6 inches. 4. 2. His vision went black at the edges, arrhythmia accelerating into something worse. Ventricular tachycardia, the kind that preceded cardiac arrest. Cedric's fingers brushed the button, pressed. But consciousness was already slipping, dragging him down into darkness that tasted like flowers and regret. His last coherent thought wasn't of his company, his empire, his billions. It was of Amanda's heartbroken face as she'd walked away, her daughter clutching that journal like evidence of everything he'd been too proud to see. I'm sorry, he tried to say, but the words never made it past his lips. The monitors flatlined, their screams echoing through $12 million worth of marble and regret. And Cedric Potter, the man who never lands, crashed for the second time in 7 days, this time with no one there to catch him. Amanda woke at 2:47 a.m. with her grandmother's voice in her ears. When the leaves call, you answer. She sat up in the darkness of her small apartment, heart hammering for reasons she couldn't name. Naomi slept in the next room, Etta's journal open on her chest where she'd fallen asleep reading. Amanda had spent 7 days trying to forget Cedric Potter's townhouse, trying to bury the hurt of being dismissed after saving a man's life. But something was wrong. She could feel it the way her grandmother had felt storms before the sky changed color. Mom, Naomi stood in the doorway, already dressed, the journal clutched in her hands. You feel it too, don't you? Amanda nodded. He's in trouble. They took the night bus, mother and daughter pressed together in silence, watching the city blur past through rain-streaked windows. Amanda knew this was crazy, returning uninvited to a place she'd been asked to leave, to a man who'd chosen doubt over trust. But Etta had taught her that some debts transcended pride. The townhouse glowed against the darkness, every window lit. Amanda's key card still worked. Security hadn't thought to revoke a cleaner's access. They slipped through the service entrance. Voices echoed from the living room. Amanda froze, pulling Naomi behind her. Just clear everything. All unapproved items, herbal products, flowers. We can't have another incident. The voice was cultured, commanding. Victor Dane, the COO. Amanda peered around the corner. Staff moved with military precision, collecting vases, tea canisters, gift baskets. Victor supervised from the center of the room, his expensive suit immaculate. His expression concerned in a way that felt rehearsed. And on the floor, barely visible behind the sofa, Cedric, unconscious, monitors beeping erratically beside him. Oh my God, Naomi breathed. Victor's head snapped toward them. Who let you in here? Security! His concern evaporated, replaced by cold authority. But Naomi wasn't looking at Victor. Her eyes had locked onto a wicker basket on the coffee table, tissue paper spilling over the edges. She moved toward it as if pulled by gravity. Naomi, don't, Amanda started. Naomi picked up a glass jar labeled Wellness Restoration. Her hands began to shake. The handwriting on the label, elegant cursive loops perfectly slanted, matched exactly the tags she'd seen on the poisoned floral arrangements a week ago. You, Naomi whispered, turning to Victor. You did this? Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. A child playing detective? This is absurd. You're trespassing. Both of you. Amanda stepped forward, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. That's your handwriting. You've been poisoning him. Prove it, Victor said, his smile sharp. A cleaner and her daughter versus the COO of a billion-dollar company. Who do you think anyone will believe? While he spoke, while he mocked them with the confidence of someone who'd always won, Naomi slipped past. She dropped to her knees beside Cedric, whose lips had gone blue, whose pulse showed lethal arrhythmia on the monitors. The fireplace, still there, still holding last week's ash. Naomi worked fast, hands remembering what her great-grandmother had taught through pages and pages of careful instruction. Ash into water, charcoal slurry, thick and dark, the emergency antidote for cardiac glycoside poisoning when nothing else was available. "What are you doing? Stop her!" Victor's voice cracked with something that might have been fear, but Amanda blocked his path, her small frame suddenly immovable. "You killed him twice. You are not getting a third chance." Naomi lifted Cedric's head, pressed the glass to his cold lips, and whispered words that carried her great-grandmother's spirit. "Don't let him win, Mr. Potter. Please don't let him win." The liquid disappeared down Cedric's throat. Victor lunged forward. "Security, get them out." Cedric's eyes opened. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to see Naomi's soot-stained hands steadying his head, enough to hear Victor's voice still barking orders. Enough to understand, with the terrible clarity that comes from being saved twice by the same unlikely hands, exactly who had been trying to kill him. "Vic, Tor—" Cedric's voice was barely audible, but it stopped everyone. Victor's expression shifted, from authority to panic in the space of a heartbeat. "Cedric, listen, you're confused. These women broke in, they've been—" "Cam Eris," Cedric whispered, his hand lifting weakly to point at the corner where security footage captured everything. "Always. Check the cameras." 2 hours later, after paramedics had stabilized Cedric, after police had arrived and Victor had been escorted out in handcuffs still protesting his innocence, the security team played the footage. There, in grainy black and white, Victor in the scullery 3 weeks ago, gloved hands placing oleander sprigs into floral arrangements, Victor swapping labels on herbal teas, Victor forging gift cards, his elegant cursive unmistakable, and in the files they found on his computer, life insurance riders with Victor as secondary beneficiary, board restructuring documents that needed only Cedric's death to activate, a paper trail of greed disguised as loyalty. Motive, a $50 million payout and control of Potter Aviation. Method, beauty that killed slowly, flowers that smiled while they poisoned. Failure, a 16-year-old girl who'd learned to read the language of leaves and a mother who trusted her daughter more than she'd feared a billionaire's doubt. In the ambulance, Cedric reached for Amanda's hand, the same hand he'd barely acknowledged for 3 years. "You came back," he whispered, wonder and shame mixing in his voice. "The leaves called," Amanda said simply, as if that explained everything. And to her, it did. Cedric Potter had spent 30 years commanding boardrooms, but he'd never felt power like this. He stood in his study 3 days after his second near-death, Victor's arrest still making headlines, and faced the people who'd failed him. His board of directors sat in leather chairs, their expressions ranging from concern to calculation. The same doctors who'd cycled through specialists without seeing the obvious stood along the walls. Media cameras rolled in the adjacent conference hall, waiting for the statement that would either save or destroy Potter Aviation's reputation. "Gentlemen," Cedric began, his voice steady despite the lingering weakness in his body, "I called this meeting to discuss truth." Robert Hale, the CFO who delivered that damning background report, shifted uncomfortably. "Cedric, perhaps we should coordinate messaging with legal before what?" Cedric interrupted, his blue eyes sharp as scalpels. "Before we admit that my COO poisoned me twice, that 8 elite specialists missed what a 16-year-old girl diagnosed in minutes, that I nearly died because pride blinded me to the only people actually trying to help." The room fell silent. Dr. Vasquez, the cardiologist from Mass General, spoke carefully. "Mr. Potter, the medical complexities involved were unprecedented. Oleander poisoning mimics so many—" "Dr. Vasquez," Cedric said quietly, the way a pilot might announce engine failure, calmly but with absolute finality. "Amanda Wright told me the flowers were wrong. She tried to warn me. I dismissed her because she cleaned my floors instead of attending medical school." He turned to face the room, his posture reflecting years of commanding authority, but his words carrying something new. Humility. "You all saw what your machines couldn't. Or rather, you didn't see what your education told you wasn't there. Amanda and Naomi Wright saw because they looked with different eyes trained by generations of women who understood that wisdom doesn't always arrive with credentials." The board members exchanged glances. This wasn't the Cedric Potter they knew, the man who never admitted fault, never showed vulnerability. The press is waiting, Hale said carefully. What exactly do you intend to say? The truth, Cedric said simply. The conference hall was packed. Journalists from business publications, medical correspondents, cameras from major networks. Cedric stepped to the podium, the same man who'd sold jets to presidents, but somehow smaller now, more human. 3 weeks ago, I collapsed in my home, he began, his voice carrying across the room. I'd been poisoned, slowly, deliberately, with oleander, a plant so beautiful it deceives you into forgetting it's deadly. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward. Victor Dane, my chief operating officer and someone I trusted for 15 years, orchestrated this poisoning. Security footage and forensic evidence confirm he placed oleander in my tea, in my floral arrangements, seeking to inherit shares and ensure insurance payouts worth over $50 million. The room erupted with questions. Cedric raised a hand, but that's not why I'm here today. I'm here to tell you about the people who saved my life, twice, while everyone else, including myself, was looking in the wrong direction. He gestured to the side of the stage. Amanda and Naomi stepped into view, both wearing simple dresses, looking profoundly uncomfortable under the lights. Amanda Wright cleaned my home for 3 years. I never learned her last name until she saved my life. Her daughter, Naomi, is 16 years old and possesses more medical intuition than the 8 specialists I hired. Naomi's hand found her mother's. They saw what your machines couldn't, Cedric continued, his voice gaining strength. They identified oleander poisoning when toxicologists were baffled. They administered activated charcoal when doctors argued about liability. They returned uninvited when I'd sent them away in doubt, and they saved me a second time when I was dying alone. A reporter shouted a question. Mr. Potter, are you saying medical professionals failed you? I'm saying we've built systems that value credentials over wisdom, degrees over experience, titles over truth, Cedric replied. The doctors weren't villains. They were limited by what they'd been trained to see. Amanda and Naomi Wright weren't limited. They'd been taught by Etta Wright, a botanical healer whose knowledge spanned generations. He paused, letting the words settle. Which is why today, I'm announcing the Potter Wright Initiative, a foundation dedicated to training emergency medical staff in botanical toxins, funding research on plant-based poisonings, and providing scholarships to students from non-traditional backgrounds pursuing medicine and botanical sciences. Applause started scattered, then built like a wave. Naomi Wright will be our first scholarship recipient, Cedric continued, his eyes finding the girl who'd saved him. She'll receive full funding for undergraduate and medical school, with the expectation that she'll carry her great-grandmother's wisdom forward into institutions that desperately need it. The applause became a standing ovation. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Amanda's arm wrapped around her daughter's shoulders, pride radiating from her quiet presence. From the crowd, reporters shouted questions. One voice carried above the others. What about Victor Dane? Cedric's expression hardened. Mr. Dane is in custody, facing charges of attempted murder. The evidence is irrefutable. He chose greed over loyalty, and he'll answer for it. Another question. How does your board feel about this foundation? Cedric glanced back at the board members watching from the wings, some supportive, others clearly uncomfortable with this public display of vulnerability. My board is divided, he said honestly. Some see this as unnecessary. Others understand that we build stronger companies when we acknowledge our blind spots. I'm moving forward regardless. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes. Questions about security protocols, about how oleander had been missed, about the foundation structure. Through it all, Amanda stood silently at the edge of the stage, watching her daughter receive recognition for knowledge that had been dismissed, devalued, nearly erased. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, when the reporters dispersed and the crowd thinned, Cedric found Amanda in the quiet hallway. You didn't have to stay silent up there, he said. You saved my life too. Amanda smiled, the expression carrying her grandmother's wisdom. Naomi is the future, Mr. Potter. I'm just the bridge between what was and what will be. That's enough. Cedric extended his hand, not with the entitlement of a billionaire, but with the gratitude of a man who'd learned finally to see. Amanda took it, and somewhere, in the memory of leaves and notebooks and generations of women who'd listened when the world refused to hear, Etta Wright smiled. 6 months later, the rooftop bloomed. Amanda stepped through the glass door and into what felt like a different world entirely. Warm, verdant, alive with the whisper of leaves against glass. The Etta Conservatory stretched across Cedric's rooftop like a promise kept, its polycarbonate panels filtering autumn sunlight into something golden and forgiving. Naomi had designed every inch of it. Raised planters lined the perimeter, filled with herbs her great-grandmother had documented. Lavender for calm, chamomile for healing, mint that climbed trellises toward the glass ceiling. In one corner, carefully labeled specimens sat behind protective barriers, oleander included, its white blossoms, beautiful and deadly, behind glass marked caution. Education requires honesty, Naomi had said when Cedric questioned including the plant that had nearly killed him. People need to see what poisoned you and respect it, not fear it. Amanda found Cedric at a small table in the center of the greenhouse, sunlight streaming through bamboo leaves overhead. 2 cups of tea sat steaming, chamomile she could smell, nothing more dangerous than that. Amanda, Cedric stood, gesturing to the seat across from him. His movements still carried traces of weakness, but his color had returned, his eyes clear. Thank you for coming. She sat, accepting the tea he poured with hands that no longer trembled when she entered this building. The silence between them was comfortable now, earned through crisis and survival. Safe tea this time, Cedric said with a wry smile, gesturing to the pot. Naomi inspected it personally, twice. Amanda smiled. She takes her responsibilities seriously. As she should. Cedric reached into his jacket and withdrew 2 envelopes, placing them carefully on the table between them. The first is an apology, formal, inadequate, but necessary, for doubting you, for sending you away when you just saved my life. For every moment, I chose pride over gratitude. Amanda's fingers brushed the envelope but didn't open it. Mr. Potter. Cedric, he interrupted gently. Please. After everything, I think we've moved past formality. Cedric, she corrected, the name still feeling unfamiliar on her tongue. You were scared. Fear makes people protective, defensive. I understand. Understanding doesn't excuse it. He pushed the second envelope toward her. This is a partnership offer. The Potter Right Initiative needs leadership, someone who understands both the science and the soul of what we're trying to do. I'd like you to be the Director of Botanical Safety Education, executive salary, full benefits, and autonomy to build the program as you see fit. Amanda stared at the envelope, emotion tightening her throat. I clean floors, Cedric. I don't have degrees or credentials. You saved my life, Amanda, Cedric said quietly, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that spoke of humility, hard-won. You recognize poisoning that 8 specialists missed. You raised a daughter who possesses more diagnostic insight than most doctors I've met. You carry knowledge that can't be taught in universities because it's been passed down through generations of women who listened when the world told them to be silent. No, sir, Cedric, Amanda corrected, shaking her head with the gentle firmness her grandmother had modeled. My daughter did that. I just listened to the plants, the way Etta taught me. And now you'll teach others, Cedric said. Hospitals, medical schools, emergency responders. The foundation has already received commitments from 12 major institutions. They want training programs, toxicology protocols, botanical identification courses. They want what you know. The greenhouse door opened. Naomi entered, carrying a notebook that looked remarkably like Etta's journals but filled with her own careful handwriting. She'd grown taller in 6 months, her confidence visible in the way she moved through space. The soil pH in Section 3 needs adjusting, she announced, then noticed her mother and smiled. Hi, Mom. Hi, Mr. Potter. Naomi. Cedric's expression softened in a way that still surprised Amanda. This man who'd once barely acknowledged their existence, now looking at her daughter with something approaching paternal pride. I was just telling your mother about the foundation's expansion. We've been invited to present at Johns Hopkins next month. I'd like you both to join me. Naomi's eyes widened. Johns Hopkins? That's one of the top medical schools in the country, which is exactly why they need to hear from you, Cedric said. Your great-grandmother's work deserves recognition from institutions that have historically dismissed it. You're the bridge between traditional knowledge and modern medicine. That matters. Naomi looked at her mother, uncertainty and excitement warring on her young face. Amanda nodded, giving permission and encouragement in the same gesture. I'll do it, Naomi said softly, for great-grandma Etta. Cedric stood, extending his hand, not the commanding gesture of a billionaire issuing orders, but the tentative offering of someone who'd learned, finally, that connection required vulnerability. Amanda took it, her calloused fingers meeting his in a handshake that felt like friendship, like partnership, like the beginning of something her grandmother would have recognized as justice. Thank you, Cedric said simply, for everything, for seeing what I couldn't, for coming back when I didn't deserve it, for teaching me that wisdom doesn't always arrive in expensive suits. Amanda squeezed his hand once before releasing it. Etta used to say that healing happens when people stop fighting and start listening. To each other, to the plants, to what's trying to save them. After Cedric left, promising to send contracts, mentorship schedules, speaking engagement details, Amanda and Naomi stood alone in the greenhouse their family's knowledge had built. Naomi moved to the center of the conservatory, where glass panels met overhead in a geometric pattern that turned sunlight into cathedral beams. She looked up, her face tilted toward the sky, visible beyond the transparent roof, her expression carrying the weight of generations. We did it, great-grandma, Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustle of leaves. Your work isn't forgotten. It's alive. It is growing. Amanda stood beside her young daughter, one arm around Naomi's shoulders, both of them bathed in light filtered through plants that healed and plants that harmed, all of them cataloged with the careful respect Etta Wright had demanded. Above them, the city stretched in every direction. Millions of people who'd never heard of Etta Wright, who'd never know they walked past Oleander in hotel lobbies, who'd never understand that sometimes salvation arrived with soot-stained hands and a grandmother's notebook. But they would learn because Naomi would teach them, because Amanda would lead the way, because Cedric Potter had been humbled enough to listen, and that listening had become a foundation, and that foundation would grow. In the corner, the oleander bloomed behind its protective glass, beautiful, deadly, honest. And high above the city, in a greenhouse named for a woman who'd spent her life listening to leaves, her legacy finally spoke loud enough for the world to hear. If this story moved you, share the moment. Don't let it fade. Follow Motherland Stories and tap that like button to keep these voices alive. Every day we uncover strong stories, raw truths, and quiet acts of courage that shape our world. Join a circle of listeners, dreamers, and changemakers, because every story deserves to be heard. This wasn't just an episode, it was a call to remember. Silence hides injustice. Courage exposes it. At Motherland Stories, we don't turn away. We bear witness. Subscribe and stand with stories that challenge power and celebrate truth.